In the shadows of human interaction lies a dark truth. Psychological manipulation can subtly ensnare the unsuspecting and shatter the foundation of personal freedom. In Break Free, Escaping the Narcissist's Web of Control, we embark on a gripping journey that transcends the typical boundaries of self-help, peeling back layers of deception to reveal the insidious tactics wielded by narcissists. This book is a powerful tool for anyone seeking to reclaim their agency and cultivate emotional resilience. You're invited to confront the chilling reality of emotional control and discover strategies to break free from its grip and reclaim your life. Break Free, Escaping the Narcissist's Web of Control, written and published by Stealth Psychology. Chapter 1: The Mask Behind the Smile. Picture this: a vibrant social gathering, laughter enveloping the air, friends conversing gleefully, and at the center stands an amicable figure, the charming host. With a bright smile and an inviting demeanor, this individual effortlessly captivates everyone around. However, as the night unfolds, an unnerving undercurrent turns the joyous atmosphere into a subtle web of manipulation. Watch closely, and you'll see how this seemingly warm exchange serves a darker purpose. The host expertly exploits their charm, not for genuine connection, but for emotional control. As the evening progresses, vulnerable guests find their enthusiastic participation coerced, paving the way for compliance while the mask of congeniality remains firmly in place. This scenario is all too familiar for victims of psychological manipulation, where charm often masquerades as affection. The manipulator's ultimate goal might not be immediately apparent. It could encompass emotional supremacy, financial exploitation, or enacting strategic social isolation. Sadly, those caught in this guise often underestimate the depth of their entrapment, believing friendships forged in brightness are unshakable. They remain blissfully unaware that the reassurance they so desperately seek is coupled with a hefty price, one that blinds them to the reality of their situation. It is crucial to recognize how these subtle tactics, draped in the allure of friendship, strain the individual's autonomy and distort perceptions. This duplicitous manipulation metamorphoses relationships into a series of calculated transactions, where trust is instrumented against itself and turned into an invisible prison. Imagining that the clinking of glasses and light-hearted interaction might shield them from the weight of emotional exploitation, victims overlook the warning signs, ensnared by the narcissist's web of charm. The smiling face becomes an opaque barrier that conceals the sinister motivations lurking beneath. In this darkness, individuals unconsciously yield control. The better the mask, the less they recognize their susceptibility. Emotional manipulation operates in shadows, where the pain of deception silently festers, hidden from the naked eye. Many find themselves ensnared in this cycle, caught between admiration for the charm on display and the piercing doubts that linger unaddressed. As they start to pick apart reality from facade, the burden of confusion mounts. Small grievances gradually accumulate, all while curiosity lingers. Perhaps the host truly cares. The realization dawns upon the victim that their well-intentioned altruism is but a carefully orchestrated script performed to cultivate dependency on the narcissist's approval, leaving them feeling valued only when reflecting the manipulator's desires. Yet the irony within this manipulation is that those drawing the emotional strings often impart an illusion, exalted by their own narratives of sacrifice and care. This mask may lead others to perceive them as benevolent, deeply attuned to the needs of those around them. Unfortunately, admiration rarely unmasks the cruelty masked by kindness. Victims, haloed by admiration of the manipulator's traits, forget they are caught in an intricate power play. By the time they grasp the gravity of their situation, their identities frequently fragment beneath the weight of incessant longing for external validation. Recognizing the game, a skill many fail to hone until it's too late, becomes their first step toward liberation. Unraveling this hidden truth is not just a journey of comprehension. It is the cornerstone of reclaiming one's life, affirming autonomy and displaced self-worth, erasing the facade that once held them captive. As victims become ensnared in the manipulator's grip, the effects ripple profoundly through their emotions, relationships, decision-making, and self-esteem. The strategic execution of psychological manipulation distorts not only one's view of others but also their perception of self, creating a pervasive environment of confusion that leaves the individual questioning their reality. Emotions become volatile. Joy is reluctantly traded for anxiety, hope transmuted into skepticism. When this emotional turbulence occurs, it also significantly hampers the ability to make sound decisions. Individuals swayed by the persuasive narratives of the charmers in their lives often prioritize others' needs over their own, leading them down a path of self-neglect that seemingly affirms that they exist only through the lenses of those manipulative relationships. Consider the case of Sarah, who found herself gradually but irrevocably lost amidst the emotional chaos orchestrated by her partner. Initially captivated by his warmth and apparent interest in her well-being, she increasingly noticed his subtle input into her daily choices. Over time, her preferences and even her friendships altered to match his desires. Exquisite floral arrangements became unnecessary, as did her connections with friends who sparked joy. Instead, meals were prepared according to his tastes, while her passions dimmed under the burden of constantly seeking validation from someone who thrived on control. Research consistently underscores how manipulative relationships foster a climate for low self-esteem, rendering individuals predisposed to making poor choices. Sarah's story exemplifies an all-too-common trajectory where emotional surrender becomes a form of second-guessing one's judgment, a phenomenon buoyed by the partner's allure yet jealously guarded intentions. A remarkable study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology correlates the addictive nature of charm with the reduction of cognitive functioning ability when posed with social dilemmas. It illustrates a troubling outcome where individuals embedded in emotionally manipulative ties might overlook red flags or write off uncomfortable feelings as inadequacies within themselves. These findings shed light on why many fall prey to such deceitful tactics. Attachment to the manipulator's flawed version of love generally nurtures a dangerous fealty that subdues critical reflection and self-truth. Couples are often manipulated into believing they deserve this love, heightening the cycle of dependence, solidifying emotional anchors that are primarily tethered to a toxic representation of affection. In such relationships, camaraderie quickly morphs into emotional conscription, where the victim may be left feeling isolated, susceptible to shame for their perceived shortcomings. Shame acts as a powerful weapon in the hands of manipulators, constraining communication and sowing discord in social spheres. The mind manipulator cultivates a false dichotomy: either seek approval from them or risk alienation and loneliness. As victims become entangled in the follower role, the wounds to self-esteem deepen. The narratives constructed by these narcissistical figures often play on insecurities meticulously cultivated over time. Exhausted and downtrodden, victims lose empowerment, rendering them captive not just to their manipulators but to the detrimental belief that they cannot reclaim autonomy. Sarah bore the emotional scars, her burgeoning self-worth stamped out by persistent critique and demanding control masked as loving concern. The narrative woven through psychological manipulation continues to reveal its complex layers. It permeates emotions and taints choices, corroding integrity while entrenching victims in doubt and despair. Recognizing this labyrinth of manipulation is just the beginning. Awareness paves the way for empowerment and archaic falsehoods to be dismantled. Now, we turn our attention to the hidden warning signs that often go unnoticed, signals of distress that forewarn of deeper entrapment. If one is to escape the unyielding grasp of manipulation, understanding these overlooked indicators is crucial. This is the bridge toward liberation from the clutches of the charming facade. Psychological manipulators are astute observers, zeroes in on specific traits and potential targets that make them particularly vulnerable. They develop a keen sense of awareness, enabling them to discern weaknesses such as low self-esteem, a high desire for approval, or a history of feeling unworthy or unloved. Often operating in both social and professional environments, they set their sights on individuals who radiate qualities that make them ideal prey for manipulation, drawing them into emotionally charged dynamics that fuel the manipulator's game. Take the case of Michael, a bright and optimistic professional who recently joined a team. Initially, he was welcomed warmly by his colleagues. However, he soon became the focus of a senior colleague, Lara, a charismatic yet controlling individual. Lara recognized Michael's eagerness to fit in and his unconscious need for validation. Through a series of seemingly innocent interactions, she began to isolate him from others by praising his contributions while subtly discrediting the input of their peers. Whether it was reinterpreting teamwork as her exclusive accomplishment or employing casual dismissals of Michael's ideas as too naive for the seasoned professional, Lara gradually built a dependency around her approval. As Michael bent to these influences, his confidence waned, and his interactions with other team members dissipated. Unbeknownst to him, a critical shift had been set in motion. He had transitioned from the vigor of enthusiastic engagement into an emotional bartering, constantly seeking Lara's acceptance while burying subconscious cues of discomfort. This marks a notable psychological alteration present when someone becomes ensnared in a manipulative environment. Intuition weakens, and reasoning takes second stage to the intensifying pressing need for affirming, invalidating choices. The subtlety of these manipulative tactics often manifests in scenarios which at first glance appear deceptively benign. During office meetings, there's commonly a polite dynamic where backhanded remarks may surface. For instance, Lara's praise of Michael often included attributions laden with sarcasm hidden in compliments. "Oh, Michael, that idea is so refreshing. It's adorable how optimistic you are, really." Even amidst praise, the emotional underpinning meticulously chips away at Michael's self-worth, feeding a vicious cycle of self-doubt he never imagined he was entering. Manipulators expertly blend their psychological acumen to create a potent atmosphere where subtle gaslighting, incremental shifts in perception occurs, rendering the target increasingly disoriented. The more a target questions their instincts or intuitions, the more leaden their capacity to determine reality becomes. Misconceptions replace clarity, as love-bombing tactics trap the target in a cycle of doubt and obedience. Thought patterns are hijacked, and the incessant need for external validation gets cataloged as a new ordinary. The gravity of understanding these tactics cannot be overstated. They are intricately transposed into the blueprint of emotional manipulation narratives that lay across relationships, be they romantic, professional, or platonic. Recognizing changing patterns in specific interactions, like Michael's experience, may embolden individuals to reanalyze their environments and identify the psychological battlegrounds where they traverse daily. Realizing these dynamics empowers the individual to fortify their self-defense mechanisms against the ever-looming threats posed by charm and control. Ultimately, understanding these tactics constitutes the inaugural step toward resisting manipulation. This knowledge breaks down barriers that these psychological controls erect and can guide readers toward reclaiming their power and self-respect. In the next section, we will delve into the escalation of control and explore how victims become entrenched within these suffocating cycles, highlighting how awareness can ultimately pave the way to liberation. Remember, recognizing these dynamics is paramount. Stay vigilant, aware, and proactive in preserving your emotional well-being. Chapter 2. The Inner Alarm Bells. Imagine a situation where you are seated at a bustling cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Across from you sits a friend, the embodiment of charisma, one who draws others in with their effortless charm. However, as the conversation unfolds, you sense a shift. It begins to feel less like a dialogue and more like manipulation. With each compliment and reassuring word, your certainty wanes, and you find yourself questioning everything you once believed about your capabilities and desires. This subtle but powerful exchange occurs not by accident, but as a deliberate tactic executed by the manipulator. Their ultimate goal? Emotional control, cloaked in the guise of friendship, leaving you vulnerable to compliance while spinning tales designed to reinforce your dependence on their perception of reality. Victims often find themselves chronically unaware of this dynamic brewing beneath the surface, mistaking false affection for genuine connection. They march onward, buoyed by persuasive whispers that promise acceptance and warmth, yet they remain oblivious to the character of their companion. During social interactions that should cultivate joy, a phenomenon known as emotional hijacking occurs. The manipulator artfully diverts attention away from their selfish motives, creating an atmosphere rife with confusion. The victim, broken down by charm and seemingly sincere feedback, unwittingly embraces this false emotional narrative, struggling to recognize the depths of their entrapment until the costs mount dramatically. Consider the story of Jessica, who found herself besieged by her mother's well-meaning yet emotionally suffocating expressions of love. Her mother, skillfully manipulating Jessica's deeply ingrained desire to please, would frequently phrase demands to give them the illusion of choice. "Honey, I really need help preparing for the family reunion, so if you could take care of it, it would mean so much to me," she would say, infusing guilt within the request. Jessica initially viewed this as an act of trust, oblivious to the growing dependency her mother cultivated over time. However, the weight of these emotional requests slowly began to cloud not only her freedom, but also her aspirations. Gone was the enthusiastic young adult full of ambition and drive, replaced now by an anxious soul who feared disappointing those closest to her. Understanding the intricacies of this dynamic reveals the subtle yet significant nature of inner alarm bells that often begin to ring, barely perceptibly at first. These warnings may manifest as physical sensations: a tightening in the chest, a growing apprehension when faced with requests, or have behavior that feels controlling or excessive. Yet while these alarm bells toll, the victim may chalk up their unease to personal shortcomings, misinterpreting the genuine threat launched against their autonomy. Moreover, emotional manipulation operates as a cascading cycle, where individuals learn to ignore these internal signals, persuading themselves that compliance proves their loyalty. Over time, resentment seeps quietly into the soul as emotional assertiveness diminishes, leading to internal conflict that often manifests at later stages, profound emotional fatigue coupled with festering resentment. The threshold of realization grows ambiguous, a dance powered by deceit wrapped in cherished memories of alleged love and kindness. In our exploration of psychological manipulation, recognizing these silently alarming signs is essential. Emotional clarity paves the way for empowerment, urging individuals to validate their own feelings even amid the deceptive manipulations of others. The necessity to listen to our inner alarms cannot be overstated, as these signals serve as life rafts in a sea of emotional confusion. Armed with awareness, readers can begin to awaken their own instincts, laying the groundwork for a more genuine connection to themselves and their responsibilities. As we proceed, we will uncover the nuances of these warning bells and better prepare for the complexities of rising awareness in the face of manipulation. As individuals fall deeper into the cunning web of emotional manipulation, the effects on their emotions, decision-making, relationships, and self-esteem become increasingly profound and tumultuous. The subtle erosion of these crucial aspects of human experience unfolds in a cyclical pattern. As self-esteem diminishes under the weight of systemic manipulation, the internal compass falters, clouding judgment and prioritizing the needs and feelings of the manipulator over one's own. The grasp of emotional control sharpens, rendering victims increasingly dependent on the very individuals who wield that control. They often find themselves entrapped in a cycle of compliance and guilt, leaving them on a precarious tightrope that they walk to appease the very source of their distress. Consider the case of Ben, a talented artist known for his impressive body of work and creative visions. First, he falls under the influence of a mentor figure who claims to guide him toward greater success. Ben's mentor distorts validation into necessity, showering attention on him, but also artfully weaving critiques that dig into the core of Ben's abilities. Each time Ben showcases his work, those critiques are framed as constructive, while the praise feels increasingly conditional. As a result, Ben begins to view his self-worth in relation solely to his mentor's approval and begins to ignore his initial artistic instincts. The very practice that once fulfilled him morphs into a source of anxiety and self-doubt, leading to diminished motivation and a crippling fear of rejection. This shared trajectory is supported by psychological research, that reveals the compelling link between manipulation and reduced self-esteem. A study in the Journal of Family Psychology points out that individuals enmeshed in control-oriented relationships frequently prioritize the needs of others, demonstrating resilience to stand on their own, thereby triggering a dissonance in their emotional reality. Such misalignment creates fertile soil for further manipulation, perpetuating behaviors that erode self-identity and self-esteem, the pillars that underpin sound decision-making. Victims of manipulation often underappreciate their judgment, which becomes further compromised. Just as Ben found solitude in the confines of flawed approval, victims often unwittingly begin to mistrust their instincts, resigned to seeking authorization outside themselves. The emotional landscape of manipulated individuals is riddled with significant turmoil, frequently feeling torn between their needs and the perceived needs of others. Cognitive distortions settle in as the line begins to blur between genuine feelings, obligations, and coercion. This emotional imbalance may even reverberate in personal relationships, where individuals become unable to foster honest connections, having learned to gauge their worth from the fleeting approval of those who control them. As trust in one's emotions erodes, so too does the ability to navigate interpersonal relationships, weaving dependence and insecurity into an intricate pattern of behavior that is difficult to unravel. Such dynamics manifest a poignant truth. The very qualities that make one a compassionate partner, friend, or colleague often leave them susceptible to manipulation. Human beings inherently seek connection, fostering a desire for approval that can become perilous in relationships suffused with emotional control. Victims gain rationale through the lens of these flawed interactions, which can lead to greater emotional dissonance, the quiet progression of distress masked as compliance, slowly intertwining with their identities without recognition. Understanding these patterns of manipulation cultivates urgency, a necessity to claim one's emotional landscape. Recognizing how the emotional dynamics of relationships can deviate from reality is crucial to reclaiming one's sense of security and autonomy. As we continue, we will delve into the hidden warning signs that many overlook, illuminating pathways toward awareness and self-preservation. Identifying these signals is vital. They signal not only distress, but also the opportunity for reclamation of emotional clarity in the shadow of manipulation. Psychological manipulators possess an uncanny ability to identify their targets, often honing in on specific traits that render individuals particularly susceptible to their influence. A recognizable blueprint typically encompasses qualities such as a strong desire for acceptance, low self-esteem, or a tendency to appease others. Manipulators, driven by their own insecurities and the need for control, skillfully exploit these vulnerabilities, weaving their charm around the premise of a beneficial relationship, even as their true intentions remain cloaked. As the manipulator's strategies unfold, those under their influence may find themselves ensnared by a slow but deliberate process that reconditions their perception of self-worth and agency. Illustrating this with Lisa's experience sheds light on these tactics. Lisa was a compassionate soul with deep-rooted empathy, always reaching out to assist friends and family through their problems. Recognizing her strong sense of responsibility, a colleague at work, Dan, targeted her. Initially appearing charming and thoughtful, Dan subtly began to shift Lisa's focus onto his needs, presenting himself as a misunderstood figure, prompting inevitable bursts of sympathy. As Lisa became more involved, Dan implemented guilt-laden narratives whenever Lisa expressed an interest in her projects or other relationships, conveying that her devotion was required for him to remain stable both emotionally and professionally. It did not take long for Lisa to sway, feeling as if advocating for herself was selfish in the face of Dan's ostensible vulnerability. The psychological shift under these circumstances is insidious. Lisa slowly begins redefining what healthy relationships look like in favor of Dan's demands, steadily adapting behaviors based upon his whims. The active reinterpretation of her self-perception results in a desperate oscillation between identity and insecurity, stirring up feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. Subtle shift patterns emerge. Even minor disagreements foster intense anxiety and trepidation regarding her decisions unfolding before her. The toll of this manipulation manifests in her mental state, leaving her isolated and questioning her earlier confident opinions. Over time, she internalizes the message that only through unwavering support can she maintain her standing in the relationship, escalating feelings of obligation against personal growth. Moreover, manipulative individuals exploit social settings to reinforce dependencies. In Lisa's case, her eagerness to maintain peace rendered her silent during important conversations, creating a toxic balance between asserting her opinions and preserving the relationship. Dan seized these moments, manipulating them to include unclear, conditional acceptance from those around him, a ritual that consistently boomeranged acceptance and dependence, further entwining Lisa in a distorted perception of reality. The crux of manipulation resonates in the psychological reactions that victims typically embody, a model that facilitates compliance while numbing a person to the reality of their circumstances. It roots deeply in the victim's psyche, creating an implicit understanding, often distorted, whereby recognizing one's own needs becomes fraught with shame and fear. Combating these feelings of guilt and obligation requires an awareness that can disrupt this cycle as victims learn to evaluate relationships through a lens shaped by self-worth and emotional health. This knowledge of how manipulators identify their targets and the cunning behavior they deploy is not only crucial for battling manipulation, but also a protective measure for overall emotional well-being. Understanding the psychological dance between coercion and compliance cultivates immediate recognition that unleashes potential for resilience. As we transition to further examine how these tactics escalate through deeper degrees of control, awareness remains indispensable. The intricacies involved in manipulation, carefully obscured behind the desires of a commanding few, serve as an ever-pressing call to action, and knowing gives you the path to reclaim your agency. Remember to keep observing and reflecting as you carve your way to autonomy and clarity. Chapter 3: The Cycle of False Affection. Imagine attending a party where laughter fills the air and friends mingle. In the crowd stands a familiar face, someone you trust completely, your partner, who appears to be the life of the gathering. With charming anecdotes and magnetic charisma, they draw on acquaintances as if they are the center of the universe. But as the evening unfolds, you begin to notice an unsettling pattern, how your partner effortlessly shifts between warmth and veiled criticism, drawing out admiration while holding you at arm's length with emotional barbs that cut deep. The ultimate goal of this behavioral dichotomy becomes glaringly apparent. Your partner seeks emotional control, ensuring that you remain loyal and compliant amid cycles of praise and subtle devaluation. It's a familiar dance, drawing you deeper into an intricate web of manipulation, making it difficult to recognize the true nature of their affection until you find yourself tangled hopelessly. The cycle of false affection is an elaborate psychological construct that exploits a relational dynamic characterized by ebbing power. In moments of warmth, the manipulator envelops their partner in adulation, affirmations and loving gestures, reinforcing a compelling image of a committed bond. However, this apparent bond soon fractures into darker realms, wherein love becomes conditional and contingent upon their partner's submissiveness. The potency of this dynamic lies in how victims, ensnared by affection, fail to see physiological shifts, a gradual, manipulative decay that codifies their norm in every interaction. Initially, the warmth feels genuine. Admiration and support seem to flow without issue. These exchanges ignite sparks of love, prompting the victim to reciprocate and further entrench themselves into serving the manipulator's needs. Take the case of Emma, a talented graphic designer with a tight-knit group of friends. When she entered into a relationship with Jake, he pursued her with remarkable intensity, a wave of compliments and future promises that made him appear perfect. Yet, beneath the surface, Jake reserved criticism for moments when Emma hesitated to comply with his demands or steps away from his desired path. Emma soon found herself questioning every decision, viewed through the lens shaped by Jake's conditional affection. The cycle progressed. Jake's compliments were abundant when she adhered to him, but when she dared assert her own desires, she was met with cold indifference, a vast expanse devoid of the warmth that first captivated her. In this pernicious cycle lies a momentous truth. Experiences of love entwined with fear excavate deep inner wounds. Victims often rationalize emotional neglect by scrutinizing their actions in the pursuit of regaining that sacred warmth, eliciting an unhealthy quest for validation that warps their notion of love and security. Over time, they adapt not only to the emotional dysregulation within the bond, but also carry the demise of their self-worth, marking every critical comment as confirmation of their alleged inadequacies. This cycle feeds upon itself, introducing feelings of guilt and shame that corrode the vessel of connection altogether. Surprisingly, those trapped in this labyrinth often struggle to decide whether to carry on with pretenses of complacency or interrupt the delusion, marking uncertainty as eternal. Before realizing the depth of emotional manipulation, many find themselves displaying physical symptoms: anxiety, fatigue, irritability, an unsettling chorus reflecting the distress embedded within the unending cycle of false affection. Understanding the intricacies of this cycle illuminated the shadows lurking within the realm of emotional intimacy, revealing how often vulnerability and manipulation are entwined. Awareness paves the way for disentanglement, offering a transformative passage to regain agency. As we proceed, we shall dissect the mechanisms at work in this cycle, exploring strategies to break free from its hold while reclaiming emotional authenticity. Acknowledging these dynamics is the pivotal step towards empowerment, propelling individuals on the journey toward authentic connections devoid of conditional affection. As individuals become engulfed in the cycle of false affection, the ramifications stretch far beyond immediate interactions. These effects ripple through emotions, decision-making, relationships, and self-esteem, creating a harrowing landscape of internal conflict. Emotional vulnerability becomes another pawn in the game of manipulation. Victims often experience heightened feelings of anxiety and insecurity, entangled in the conflicting messages emanating from the relationship. The praise received in one moment can vanish just as quickly in the next, transforming into criticism that leaves the victim scrambling to regain favor. This discordant emotional climate significantly alters decision-making as individuals begin weighing choices against the whims of their manipulator rather than against their own values and desires. Take, for instance, Sarah, who had spent several years in a relationship with Tom. Initially, Tom's adoration felt intoxicating, lifting Sarah's spirits as they enjoyed their life together. However, the allure of love twisted over time into an emotional battleground where simple decisions turned into anxiety-riddled exercises in caution. Whenever Sarah opted to pursue her interests or hobbies, Tom's affections would withdraw, ascending into a cycle of affection that wove manipulation into every choice she made. Through a process of constant validation-seeking, Sarah began to assume that her decisions had to cater to Tom's expectations. Anything outside of that was regarded as betrayal. The assertion of her identity grew weak as she fragmented into a reflection that mirrored Tom's parameters of approval. Research supports this insidious outcome, indicating that emotional manipulations can align with the psychological phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. Individuals often experience mental stress when their behavior doesn't align with new beliefs imposed by their manipulators. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology highlights how such internal conflicts distort personal judgment, wherein fear of disapproval prompts victims to forego personal autonomy in favor of perceived relational safety. In Sarah's situation, disconnecting her individual desires led to a degradation of her self-worth. Decisions once rooted in her values became twisted into compliance, and emotional independence faded as she forfeited familial and social connections to maintain her relationship with Tom. This dynamic not only dismantles self-esteem, but also engenders an overwhelming sense of isolation. Victims may find themselves withdrawing from friends and loved ones, reinforcing the manipulator's grip under the guise of loyalty and love. These feelings of social isolation feast on insecurities, spiraling the victim further into a labyrinth of emotional turmoil. Sarah, by choosing to prioritize Tom over her friends, lost herself within this isolation. Critical bonds of community that could have provided support, encouragement, and perspective faded into the background as she viewed those connections through a lens filtered with guilt and obligation, not wanting to jeopardize Tom's fragile emotional state. As the cycle of false affection secures its grip, victims often feel implored, both consciously and unconsciously, to adhere to institutional expectations of affection within the confines of the relationship. The alluring whirlpool of conditional love poses an expectation that emotional intimacy equates to surrender, a burdensome misconception that erodes authentic connections. The gradual shedding of self hinges on the victim's preoccupation with the manipulator's approval, obscuring their own identity and needs. Amidst this emotional quagmire emerges an urgent necessity for recognition and understanding. Identifying how this cycle seeps into the foundation of one's self-worth and distorts decisions is vital for extricating oneself from relationship toxicity. This knowing not only sheds light on patterns but offers the key to reclaiming agency and authenticity. As we proceed, we will delve deeper into the warning signs of emotional manipulation that frequently go unnoticed, catalyzing an awakening to one's experiences and facilitating a journey towards profound self-discovery and liberation. Easing these predatory tactics of manipulation cultivates an essential awareness, alerting individuals to the inherent dangers of distorted relationships that disguise themselves as affection. Clarity unveils the intricate layers of such interactions, illustrating how manipulative forces exploit vulnerabilities. It is crucial for targets to develop an understanding that this dynamic is neither benign nor inherently harmless. What begins as a well-intentioned connection can swiftly devolve into a trap that feeds off uncertainty and emotional dependency. Emily's story offers vital lessons when it comes to recognizing patterns within relationships, a persistent disruption woven through praise laced with conditionality. These experiences alert us to the necessity of maintaining a sense of self amidst relationships demanding loyalty and adherence over mutual respect and genuine engagement. Observing how Mark identified Emily as a target and interacted with her self-esteem rings alarm bells that should empower potential victims to analyze their circumstances thoughtfully. This understanding is critical for self-defense, acting as the first step toward resistance. Knowledge is not only power, it serves as a lifeline that fosters resilience against emotional manipulation. Awareness can facilitate a foundation for reclaiming one's identity and reinforcing healthier boundaries in interpersonal dynamics. As we move forward, let us explore how these deceptive cycles escalate, examining the mechanisms by which emotional manipulation deepens its hold, ensuring that your journey toward diligence in maintaining healthy relationships remains a pivotal priority. Please remember that acknowledging these tactics allows you to regain authority over your emotional landscape, drawing you closer to authentic connections built on trust and mutual respect. Chapter 4. Daily Anchors of Self-Worth. Picture a scene where a dedicated employee, Julia, starts her day excited to present her ideas in a team meeting. She's invested time and energy in crafting a proposal she feels passionate about. As she enters the room, she is met with her supervisor, Karen, who greets her with a slight smile but a reminder of previous failures. Just remember, don't overthink this. I would hate for the team to feel dragged down by issues we've discussed before. This casual remark, while seemingly harmless, carries with it a weight, an implicit undertaking that success is conditional on avoiding mistakes. As the meeting progresses, Julia finds herself hesitating to share her thoughts. She recognizes the implicit control Karen wields through manipulation, with her ultimate goal being the suppression of autonomy and innovation. As Julia feels her self-worth teetering under the burden of expectation and comparison, she remains unaware of how deeply the grounded fears of judgment penetrate her psyche until it's too late. In these subtle but chilling interactions lies the real threat of psychological manipulation. The gradual erosion of self-worth through conditional acceptance masked as constructive critique. Victims can often fail to grasp the full extent of their entrapment in a toxic dynamic because the manipulations are wrapped in familiar practices and societal norms wherever authority is located. Manipulators thrive not only on control but also on emotional diminishment, building an empire that rides on the hesitance and conformity of those they target. Consider Alice, a mother whose life revolves around her teenage daughter, Mia. Rather than fostering an environment of independence, Alice unintentionally instills fear of failure through parental love laced with critically selective praise. "You're only as good as your last grade," Alice often remarks, leading Mia to prioritize academic achievement over her mental health. Over time, Mia internalizes the message that her self-worth hinges solely on performance, leading her to harbor anxieties whenever confronted with failure. This manipulation, albeit unintentional, creates a relational dynamic that instills fear more than affection, with Mia moving toward compliance instead of self-discovery. These daily anchors of self-worth become frail constructs, leaving victims like Julia and Mia defenseless against the crushing complexities of societal expectations. Recognizing these pervasive themes underscores the delicate psychological shifts that occur in victims of manipulation. Their self-esteem often operates within a conditional framework dictated by external approval rather than intrinsic values. Chained to transactional validation, their identity becomes an echo of others' opinions, plummeting confidence consolidated by fears tied to critique and rejection. The crippling sensations instigated by manipulative dynamics prevent individuals from seizing opportunities for growth. The absence of constructive critique transforms into fears that silence potential joy and exploration. Much like Julia, whose ideas remain suffocated in the wake of overbearing critique, victims become chronic spectators of their own lives. Rather than champions of change, they step into rehearsed roles dictated by safety and acceptance. Recognizing these daily anchors is critical in counteracting the emotional impacts of manipulation. Understanding that conditional love and acceptance can stifle growth fosters the belief that genuine validation must stem from within. This acknowledgement serves as a lantern against the stormy currents of punitive manipulations. It rescues individuals from the clutches of sustained self-doubt and disillusionment. As we transition to the next discussion, we will delve deeper into reclaiming self-worth, highlighting empowering strategies to break free from these entrapments in pursuit of becoming truly self-defined. These truths cannot remain shrouded in the dark any longer. The path to liberation begins here. As individuals navigate the emotionally complex landscape of their daily lives, the anchoring of self-worth in external validation diminishes their emotional well-being, distorting decision-making, relationships, and ultimately self-esteem. The cycle of relying on conditional acceptance, whether from authority figures, parents, peers, or partners, generates a pervasive sense of insecurity that shapes choices and reinforces compliance over the pursuit of genuine self-expression. When self-worth is shackled to the approval of others, it can provoke trepidation related to pursuing one's desires and passions, inhibiting an individual's growth and exploration. Consider the situation of Chris, an ambitious young professional eager to advance in his career. Initially, he thought his eagerness to impress his coach, an influential mentor, would propel him toward success. However, Chris soon discovered that his self-worth was inconstant, fluctuating alarmingly with each interaction. Feedback evolved from constructive guidance into pointed assessments of his performance capability. Each time Chris faced critical comments, he adopted a defensive posture, often reframing his ideas or deferring to the mentor's opinions rather than voicing his own. This calculated restraint, fostered by fear, infiltrated his decision-making. It became increasingly challenging for him to push the boundaries of his creativity, inducing paralyzing doubt that roared louder in the face of innovative pursuits. Psychological research substantiates this unease, with studies revealing that those who attach their self-esteem to external validations also exhibit heightened sensitivity to criticism. A key study in the Journal of Personality found that individuals whose self-worth fluctuates based on feedback report increased anxiety and depressive symptoms, suggesting an alignment between emotional health and the autonomy to make decisions unencumbered by others' expectations. For Chris, the battle against stifling insecurities led him into a behavioral pattern where he favored the approval of his mentor over the nurturing of his unique talents, thus sacrificing potential avenues of expression. The repercussions extend far beyond individual decision-making, morphing into relational patterns that undermine genuine connections. As individuals like Chris operate primarily based on the whimsical foundations laid by manipulative anchors of self-worth, authentic relationships suffer. Their attachments become transactional, often lacking depth, as personal insecurities inadvertently fuel mistrust and emotional withdrawal. For instance, Chris's unwarranted fear of disapproval not only strained his interactions with his mentor, but stifled his connections with colleagues who could offer vital support and camaraderie. Moreover, this emotional maneuvers have profound consequences for long-term self-esteem. Chronic exposure to manipulation aggravates feelings of inadequacy, seeping into an individual's core identity. As Chris remained tethered to the unrealistic expectation of perpetual approval, his sense of self began to unravel. Instead of grounding himself in confidence derived from personal achievement or self-reflection, his self-image became conditional, tethered to feedback loops that emphasized compliance rather than individual merit. Each failure became cemented in his psyche, serving as validation for the charade of perceived incompetence. Recognizing these dynamics is essential to dismantling the mechanisms perpetuating emotional manipulation and the corrosive impacts on one's self-worth. The urgency associated with understanding the interplay between external validation and self-perception is paramount. Reclaiming autonomy provides a path toward holistic self-development and improved mental well-being. By learning to identify the levers of manipulation at play, individuals can begin to establish authentic self-anchoring sourced within, which fosters a sense of reclamation. In our subsequent discussion, we will explore the hidden warning signs that are often overlooked, those subtle cues that signal manipulative behavior, and offer guidance on how to navigate them effectively. Understanding these signs is critical for cultivating resilience in the face of emotional challenges, enabling an empowered return to authentic self-worth. Manipulators possess a keen ability to identify individuals who are particularly vulnerable to their tactics, exploiting emotional weaknesses and hidden vulnerabilities to assert control. They are often adept at reading social cues and discerning insecurities, adopting tailored approaches that instigate dependence while maintaining a facade of concern or kindness. By specifically targeting individuals who exhibit traits such as low self-esteem, excessive empathy, or a strong desire for approval, manipulators can sustain a dynamic where victims become ensnared in a cycle of dependency shaped by conditional validation. Take, for instance, the case of David, a shy and affable student who struggled with self-confidence upon entering college. His eager desire to make friends made him a prime target for Alex, a well-liked senior with a magnetic personality. Alex quickly observed David's need for acceptance and affection, seizing the opportunity to draw David into a friendship that initially felt warm and supportive. However, as their relationship evolved, Alex's behavior subtly shifted. Compliments and encouragement gradually morphed into sly comments disguised as jokes, eroding David's self-esteem. "You really thought you could lead that project?" Alex would laugh, prompting David to laugh along, though inside he felt a stab of insecurity. Each interaction became a tug-of-war of self-worth masked as camaraderie. As David navigated this shift, he experienced a profound psychological transformation. Initially energized by Alex's apparent support, he began to reassess his self-image through the lens of Alex's opinions. Disguised as companionship, interactions turned detrimental, rendering David increasingly brimming with self-doubt. The theoretical framework of cognitive dissonance elucidates this permissive drift. David found it challenging to correlate his feelings of inadequacy with the belief that he had a supportive friend. He momentarily resolved this dissonance by conforming to Alex's desires, convinced that aligning himself with Alex's worldview was the only way to secure validation. The consequences of this manipulation on David's mental landscape were insidious. His emotional autonomy faded amidst Alex's persistent need for control. As time progressed, David began choosing activities solely based on Alex's preferences, compounding feelings of isolation from potential friends and stifling his unique identity. In moments when David attempted to exert independent thought, Alex's gaslighting would swiftly invoke deeper insecurities. A comment like, "You should really think things through. It doesn't seem like you know how to make the right choices," would send David spiraling. This process illustrates the subtle psychological shifts that transpire when one's perception becomes clouded by manipulation. The internalization of negative assertion eventually transformed David into an anxious entity, shackled by fear of disapproval and fervently seeking Alex's approval above all. Emotional anchors were locative illusions, with David's self-worth increasingly coalescing around Alex's whims and narratives. Recognizing these manipulative tendencies is pivotal for protection against emotional exploitation. The stories of individuals like David emphasize the importance of vigilance in interpersonal relationships. Becoming aware of the nuanced behaviors that characterize manipulation can arm individuals with the tools necessary to reclaim their self-worth. Understanding how manipulators identify targets and disrupt bonds lays the foundation for resistance, acknowledging that one's worth should never be contingent upon the validation of another. In our next section, we will expand our discussion by examining the escalation of control that occurs in manipulative relationships, exploring how victims can become entrapped in deepening cycles of compulsion and compliance. By illuminating these dynamics, we aim to provide insights that empower individuals to break free from damaging interaction patterns. Remember, fostering awareness is the first line of defense against emotional manipulation. Every insight opens the door to reclaiming personal autonomy and self-worth. Chapter 5: Boundaries and Guilt. Imagine a scenario where Maria is at a family gathering, surrounded by warm conversation and laughter. She should feel at home. Instead, she carries an inner burden. Her mother, who has always been demanding, poses a series of questions about her life choices. Questions laced with disapproval, masquerading as concern. "Are you still working at that job? I thought you wanted to be a doctor," she probes, seemingly innocent yet profoundly critical. What Maria perceives as maternal care is a veiled attempt to manipulate her choices, ensuring that her daughter remains compliant and tethered to her expectations. In the throes of this interaction, the emotional control her mother exerts becomes clear. The goal is to evoke guilt and maintain a dynamic where Maria feels beholden to her mother's standards rather than empowered in her independence. It is here that the subtle confines of guilt tighten around victims, binding them to the manipulator's desires and leaving them often unaware of their own entrapment until the consequences start gnawing at their self-identity. This pervasive dynamic smolders within the context of many familial and interpersonal relationships, where boundaries are obscured by the weight of expectations. Manipulators identify vulnerabilities and exploit them through guilt-laden assertions that cloud an individual's self-perception. The investment in familial relationships often cultivates a belief that emotional ties equate with duty to adhere to others' demands, shrouding outright manipulation in the guise of care. Maria feels an irrepressible urge to live up to her mother's ideal, prioritizing those expectations above her aspirations. The psychological repercussions of surrendering personal boundaries in favor of appeasing others can be devastating. When guilt is wielded as a weapon, it strikes at the heart of self-esteem. Maria begins to internalize the belief that self-fulfillment must yield to familial expectation, and her decisions evolve from expressions of joy to refrains echoing disappointment. Research in the field of psychology highlights the debilitating effects of such conditioning on mental health. Studies show that individuals grappling with persistent guilt are likely to experience higher levels of anxiety and depression, stemming from an inability to assert their own needs and boundaries meaningfully. They function within a suffocating environment, relinquishing autonomy to maintain superficial peace with the manipulative parties in their lives. Relationships characterized by these entrenched dynamics become riddled with tension. Maria's interactions with others begin to mirror those with her mother. She finds herself taking on projects at work, stretching her capabilities to the limits, not for personal growth, but to avoid the anticipated guilt she expects from others if she doesn't conform. Each time she dismisses her own plans to placate someone else, her self-image further unravels, feeding the cycle of self-neglect disguised as some warped form of love and duty. The urgency to understand the mechanisms of guilt and boundary erosion is paramount. Recognizing when guilt is being strategically employed by others is the first step toward dismantling its stronghold. Maria's story serves as a reminder. Boundaries are essential for emotional health, providing necessary protection against manipulative tendencies. Individuals are not obliged to sacrifice their identities and aspirations in deference to another's vision. As we proceed to the next segment, we will delve deeper into how to establish and maintain healthy boundaries, empowering strategies to thwart the ever-encroaching emotional control of manipulators. By reclaiming boundaries, individuals may begin reclaiming their sense of self, cultivating spaces rich in authenticity. Understanding guilt is vital, not as a tool to govern others, but as a signal to foster healthy dialogues that promote personal well-being. As individuals succumb to feelings of guilt and relinquish their boundaries, their emotional landscape becomes altered in profound ways. Victims trapped in these dynamics often experience a cascade of repercussions that negatively influence their emotions, decision-making, relationships, and self-esteem. The undulating tide of guilt, wielded by manipulators as a weapon of control, creates an atmosphere where the individual's personal needs are continually subordinate to the expectations and desires of others. This behavior can induce a pervasive sense of anxiety, encapsulated by an insistent fear of disappointing others. The once clear lines delineating personal desires become obscured, leading to a painful disconnection from authentic self-expression. Take the example of Rachel, a devoted daughter who spends her weekends caregiving for her elderly parents. Motivated partly by love but largely by a sense of obligation, Rachel finds herself trapped in a cycle dictated by her parents' expectations. Despite her own aspirations to travel and establish a career, Rachel's actions are often governed by guilt, which escalates when she considers pursuing opportunities that would take her away from her parental obligations. The emotional undercurrent of "what will they think" overwhelms any burgeoning desire for independence, resulting in a profound internal struggle. Each time Rachel sacrifices her plans for her parents' needs, her self-esteem diminishes, subtly affirming the belief that her worth is tied exclusively to her role as caregiver. This self-deprecation manifests in tangible ways that inhibit healthy decision-making. Rachel's choices evolve from those of excitement and personal development to those solely reflecting her reluctance to offend her parents. Research published in the Journal of Family Psychology underscores this phenomenon, demonstrating that excessive feelings of guilt can impair cognitive function and decision-making capabilities. Individuals entrenched in guilt become more likely to prioritize others' needs at their own expense. The psychological toll of such relentless self-neglect elevates feelings of worthlessness, creating a distressing cycle that imbues every action with uncertainty. The ramifications of such dynamics further complicate relationships. As Rachel remains submerged in guilt, her connections with others wane. Friends and potential partners appear less appealing if they threaten to distract her from parental obligations. Rachel's inability to assert her own boundaries manifests as withdrawal, which isolates her further. The relational fabric phrase, "Those who would offer support find it challenging to connect with someone who is already tethered under the weight of obligation and self-sacrifice." In turn, this isolation fuels the guilt. Rachel feels increasingly alone, and yet her sense of duty reinforces her commitment to self-neglect. In moments when she does express resentment or desire for freedom, guilt rushes back in, smothering any embers of defiance. The interplay between these emotions creates a complex web that pulls her deeper into dependency and dissatisfaction. As manipulative relationships flourish, the limbic system engages. An emotional tug-of-war further entrenches feelings of guilt and minimizes the possibility of reestablishing boundaries. Understanding the mechanisms by which guilt operates is crucial for prevention. Recognizing the insidious ways emotional exploitation creeps into relationships allows individuals like Rachel to break the cycle of guilt-driven decisions. It fosters awareness and encourages people to assert their boundaries, acknowledging that they are deserving of self-fulfillment beyond mere familial expectations. As we transition to the next chapter, we will unveil the hidden warning signs that often evade notice, signals of emotional manipulation disguised as affection or caring. By pinpointing these signals, individuals can guard against encroaching guilt and manipulation, actively preserving their autonomy and paving the way for genuine, nurturing relationships that honor personal authenticity. Understanding these signs is not merely beneficial. It is vital for reclaiming agency and crafting a life grounded in self-respect and freedom. Manipulators possess a keen sense for identifying their targets, honing in on individuals' vulnerabilities and emotional weaknesses with alarming precision. By observing traits such as excessive empathy, a desperate need for approval, or the inclination to please others, they can strategically position themselves to exert influence and control. Whether in workplace environments, familial settings, or relationships, manipulators often select individuals who exhibit signs of self-doubt or whose emotional states can be easily manipulated through guilt or obligation. This calculated approach allows them to ensnare their targets in elaborate webs of emotional dependency, all while masquerading under a veneer of care and concern. Consider the experience of Jason, a soft-spoken warehouse worker who finds himself frequently exploited by his supervisor, Linda. Linda possesses an uncanny ability to pinpoint Jason's vulnerabilities. She knows he is intent on making a good impression while simultaneously grappling with lingering self-doubt about his capabilities. In this environment, Linda routinely employs flattery, coupled with guilt-laden demands. "Jason, you're always so reliable. I can't trust anyone else to handle this shipment like you can," she might say as she delegates additional responsibilities that push his limits. Initially, Jason feels appreciated, but as more work piles up, he becomes increasingly overwhelmed, leading him to doubt his performance even more acutely. The psychological effects of such manipulation manifest as a shifting emotional landscape. As Jason complies with Linda's demands, he feels the exhilaration of acceptance fading into a nagging sense of obligation. What began as praise morphs into pressing duty, culminating in his realization that the very attributes that qualified him for the job are wielded against him. Each time he agrees to the added workload, he feels his boundaries eroding, reinforcing the idea that his value is contingent upon his compliance and availability. Psychological research underlines that when individuals link their self-worth or identity to their roles as pleasers or caretakers, they trap themselves in a cycle of doubt, shame, and resignation. Manipulators like Linda adeptly create situations in which targets become entrenched in guilt, perpetuating a relentless cycle of compliance. The dynamic between Jason and Linda exemplifies how manipulation can distort decision-making. Rather than trusting his judgment, Jason internalizes Linda's insinuations that refusing her demands equates to failure or betrayal. He navigates his workplace bend towards appeasement, often disregarding important rejuvenation time, and sacrifices personal aspirations along the way. His once thriving confidence begins wilting in the shadow of anxiety and resentment, chipping away at what led him to enjoy his work initially. Transgressing these emotional bounds can also ripple outward, affecting Jason's other interpersonal relationships. Friends may notice that he is increasingly withdrawn or busy, and family members may feel resentful of his predominant focus on work commitments over personal happiness. The obligation he believes he owes Linda eclipses all else, thereby disconnecting him from the support networks that could provide essential perspective when navigating grievances. Recognizing how manipulators selectively identify and exploit weaknesses is a key defensive strategy against emotional exploitation. It compels individuals like Jason to examine the nuances within their relationships, ensuring they do not become unwitting participants in a dynamic that contravenes their personal well-being. Understanding these tactics becomes the first crucial step toward resisting the pervasive influence of emotional manipulation and reclaiming one's sense of self-worth and agency. As this chapter concludes, we will next explore the escalation of control that manipulative behaviors can entail, and how victims become entrapped in cycles where submission appears as the only route to survival. Illuminating these nuances is vital in fostering resilience and empowerment to break free from damaging relational patterns. Recognizing the mechanisms at play not only facilitates personal liberation, but further nurtures healthier dynamics in all interpersonal realms. Please remain engaged with this exploration, as every insight reinforces the steps toward reclaiming autonomy and emotional authenticity. Chapter 6: The Illusion of Love. Imagine Sarah, a bright and vibrant woman who has just begun a promising romantic relationship. Mark, her new partner, envelops her in a whirlwind of affection and attention that sweeps her off her feet. At first, his compliments feel genuine, and Sarah interpolates those adulations into her self-worth. Friends remark on how lucky she is, and she feels elated. However, as the weeks pass, the warmth of their connection starts to reveal underlying ironies. Mark's attention becomes increasingly suffocating. His constant messaging, never-ending calls, and insistence on spending every moment together soon eclipse Sarah's personal time and relationships. What Sarah initially believed was love is slowly morphing into an unhealthy need for compliance. Mark's ultimate goal unfolds. He seeks emotional control shrouded in the guise of love, ensnaring Sarah with affection but extracting ownership of her existence until she becomes oblivious to the constricting nature of their union. This manipulation often disguises itself under the illusion of care, rendering the line between genuine love and emotional exploitation perilously thin. Sarah, entranced by the sweetness of affection at the beginning, is largely unaware of the shifting dynamics in the emotional landscape of their relationship. It isn't until she feels trapped that she recognizes her sense of independence slowly ebb away. Mark's charm is infectious. It seduces her worldview into submission, convinced that any criticism mirrored back at her is a betrayal of love. Therefore, Sarah fails to transparently evaluate her feelings or the relationship's health as the emotional control tightens around her. The consequences of this illusion are grave and multifaceted. Victims such as Sarah become engulfed in the emotional dependency nurtured by their manipulators, rendering them prisoners of their own aspirations. Initially thrilling moments of intimacy devolve into dangerous vacuums of isolation. As friends and loved ones grow distant, Sarah's emotional autonomy dwindles, compressed under the weight of Mark's growing expectations. He discards her circles of support, framing them as problematic and warning her against their influence. "I just want what's best for you," he assures, while his controlling nature simmers beneath the surface. It mirrors a classic manipulation tactic, where isolating one's partner fosters dependency upon the abuser. Research underscores the psychological mechanisms at play in situations like Sarah's, indicating that individuals entrenched in relationships marked by control often experience acute emotional turmoil. A study published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence emphasizes how emotional dependence can lead victims to become reluctant to recognize unhealthy aspects of their relationships, compounding their entrapment over time. Instead of viewing the disturbing tendencies clearly, victims internalize the manipulator's messages, which turns them further inward, stripping away individuality and confidence. As Sarah navigates oppressive feelings of guilt or shame for wanting personal space, she finds herself finally balancing on a tightrope, seeking Mark's approval while disregarding her inner voice. The psychological toll results in a quasi-existing bond propelled by fear rather than connection. Thoughts may penetrate her consciousness. Am I being selfish for wanting time alone? Overshadowing her need for self-care. Such queries dramatize the warped reality of their dynamic, culminating in feelings of resentment and anxiety juxtaposed against the affection she once cherished. Understanding the mechanism behind the illusion of love is critical to breaking free from cycles of manipulation. Victims need to illuminate the nuanced ways emotional exploitation obscures an individual's perception of worth and agency. By reflecting on manipulative tactics entwined within affectionate displays, individuals can begin to unravel the deceptive threads that tether them to a false sense of love. Recognizing this divergence lays the foundation for empowerment, fostering environments wherein individuals can explore authentic relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than control. As we transition to the next discussion, we will delve into how emotional manipulation evolves and escalates, resulting in increasingly refined tactics that maintain power over victims. Knowledge remains crucial in these scenarios, granting individuals the insight to regain their lives and redefine love in genuine terms aligned with freedom and choice. You are urged to stay engaged in these revelations. Every step taken toward understanding propels personal liberation from the confines of emotional manipulation. As individuals become enmeshed in the illusion of love, the impacts reverberate through their emotions, decision-making processes, relationships, and sense of self-worth. The cognitive dissonance bred from manipulation creates disorienting clashes between genuine affection and toxic entitlement. In Sarah's case, she finds herself oscillating between moments of deep love for Mark and profound discomfort in his controlling behaviors. This internal conflict engenders a deep-seated anxiety that is often unrecognized and goes unaddressed, compelling her to mitigate discomfort by suppressing her desires and opinions to maintain a semblance of harmony in their relationship. The emotional volatility leaves victims vulnerable, fostering a landscape where empowerment is eclipsed by insecurity. Studies consistently indicate that individuals subjected to such emotional manipulation can suffer lasting effects on their mental well-being. Research in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology elucidates that individuals with low self-esteem are more susceptible to falling into the traps of manipulative relationships. Such individuals accept unreasonable compromises, believing they must earn affection by consistently putting others first. Consequently, Sarah may refrain from disputes over Mark's overbearing behaviors for fear of further alienation or confrontation. In doing so, she unwittingly prioritizes Mark's comfort at the expense of her emotional health. This constant self-neglect not only deteriorates Sarah's self-esteem, but also entwines her vitality in the illusion of love. As she forfeits her interests and circles of support in favor of sustaining her relationship with Mark, she further entrenches herself within this harmful dynamic. Decision-making becomes mangled under external perceptions, convincing Sarah that expressing her needs may cost her the affection and attention she desperately craves. Psychological studies reveal a notable correlation between emotional dependency and the decline of decision-making capacity. Those engaged in such relationships foster compulsive behaviors that prioritize the desires of the manipulator. Furthermore, emotional manipulation profoundly veils the authenticity of relationships. Friends may become distant as they observe Sarah's withdrawal and inability to maintain her social connections. Mark's tactics, intended to isolate her socially, backfire when it cultivates distance, not just from her friends, but also from her true self. Each negative interaction reinforces the idea that relationships should be subordinated to emotional service, carving away individual autonomy as trust in her instincts diminishes over time. Sarah's social circle witnesses a transformation. The vibrant, inquisitive individual they once knew has evolved into someone habitually deferred to Mark's agenda, thus influencing the perception they hold of her character. In tandem, when self-worth hinges on emotional validation derived from a partner's approval, self-esteem flounders. Victims of emotional manipulation are frequently caught in self-critical spirals. When Sarah identifies faults in herself mirrored from Mark's pointed remarks, or dismisses her own needs to accommodate his demands, her self-image continues to erode like sandy shores beneath persistent waves. Research in the American Journal of Clinical Psychology highlights that the longer individuals remain in such manipulative settings, the deeper their psychological binds become entrenched, exacerbating mental health issues and breeding emotional detachment. This understanding illuminates the urgency of recognizing psychological manipulation's illusion of love. Acknowledging such tactics empowers individuals like Sarah to reclaim autonomy and rebuild their self-esteem. As this section concludes, we will soon explore the hidden warning signs of emotional manipulation, subtle indicators that may otherwise slip through the cracks of self-awareness. Knowledge of these signals is not merely advantageous, it is a critical lifeline that ensures emotional agency. Awareness elevates one's capacity to advocate for oneself and reinforce the belief that love should stand as a foundation built on respect, support, and mutual understanding, impervious to controlling tactics that interfere with authenticity. Every insight propels the journey toward healing and emotional freedom. So let's navigate together this crucial lesson in recognition and self-defense. Manipulators are often adept at identifying their targets by closely observing traits, that make individuals particularly vulnerable to emotional exploitation. They tend to gravitate toward those who display a marked need for validation, have low self-esteem, or demonstrate excessive empathy. This intentional calibration plays out in both personal relationships and broader social environments, where manipulative individuals tailor their tactics to exploit weaknesses and assert control. Consider the case of Vic, a talented, aspiring musician. He is well-liked and enjoys performing at local venues, yet struggles with self-doubt regarding his talent. Enter Sarah, a charismatic veteran artist who is quick to praise his performances and express interest in mentoring him. Initially, Vic feels elated by this new connection, banking on Sarah's experience and apparent interest in helping him succeed. However, Sarah's offers of guidance soon reveal an ulterior motive. She begins dictating the direction of Vic's career and influencing his choices under the pretense of helping him navigate the competitive landscape of the music industry. As their relationship develops, Sarah skillfully imposes her vision on Vic's artistic expression, forcing him to conform to her ideas rather than encourage his individual creativity. Each time he strives to assert his perspective or introduce an original concept, Sarah dismisses his input, disguising her cruelty as tough love. This trend of undermining emerges subtly, cloaked in the guise of mentorship and concern for Vic's future. Unfortunately, Vic's vulnerability lies in his desire for approval from someone he perceives as more experienced, thereby allowing him to ignore the alarm bells ringing within as he increasingly seeks her validation. Psychologically, the gradual implementation of these manipulative tactics can significantly impair an individual's confidence and self-worth. Victims often oscillate between gratitude for the manipulator's help and a profound unease, manifesting as confusion or frustration over their own insecurity. As Vic adapts to Sarah's expectations, he begins to doubt his ability to make authentic artistic decisions, altering his identity to fit her mold. This dynamic fetters Vic within a frustrating cognitive dissonance, forcing him to rationalize his growing emotional distress as determination to succeed, rather than succumb to Sarah's controlling influence. The emotional toll of this manipulation is compounded by the consistent reinforcement of guilt. Every time Vic entertains thoughts of shifting away from Sarah's influence or challenging her directives, a nagging sense of guilt arises. He feels as though he would be betraying someone who has ostensibly invested in his future. This mental tug-of-war entrenches him in the relationship, leaving him unable to disengage from Sarah's disturbing grip. Consequently, his artistic career, once a source of passion and gaiety, begins transforming into a conveyor of anxiety and compliance. Realizing how manipulators methodically identify targets equips individuals with tools to defend themselves against emotional exploitation. By awakening to these dynamics, people like Vic may reclaim autonomy within their relationships and recognize when someone attempts to encroach upon their individuality under an illusory veil of love or mentorship. Awareness of manipulation tactics forces victims to confront their conditioning and prioritize their emotional well-being. In Break Free, Escaping the Narcissist's Web of Control, we have explored the intricate dynamics of emotional manipulation and the profound impact it has on individuals' lives. From recognizing the manipulator's tactics to understanding the devastating cycle of false affection, we've delved into actionable strategies for reclaiming self-worth and establishing healthy boundaries. This book serves as a guide toward cultivating awareness, fostering resilience, and empowering readers to navigate their relationships with clarity and confidence. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this content. Your journey toward empowerment is just beginning. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights and support.